We have about an hour scheduled. Thank you for joining, everybody. This is the fiscal year 2024-2025 Community Wildfire Prevention Grant Workshop. If you're in the wrong place, you probably don't want to stay for this whole conversation, but we welcome any and all. We're going to cover a lot today. We're mostly going to focus, so there'll be 4 series in this workshop. The first one is focused on grant overview. So giving you basically an overview of the grant program, what's eligible, what's not eligible, and give you an idea of the application process and review. We'll have 3 other workshops this month that are on our website. And really these workshops are meant to help the community and yourselves think about what goes into creating a project that can then be applied to for a grant. So here's the table of contents. We'll go over the grant program summary. We'll talk about eligible and ineligible projects, eligible applicants, and specific requirements for those applicants, conditions and important points of the grant program, and we'll cover the application process. We'll talk about California Environmental Quality Act requirements, and we'll talk about what happens post-award, and we'll end up with the conclusion here, and we'll have some time, hopefully at the end, to answer some specific questions. I am happy to stay until 5:30 to answer questions. We will stop recording after the presentation. So to give you guys just a quick overview real quick, again, this is a grant workshop for the Community Wildfire Prevention Grant. There's going to be a lot of information that we're going to cover over the next month. And I think it's pretty easy to feel a little bit overwhelmed with what actually goes into creating a project and writing a grant. There's some people that think that it can be done in a month or even a couple of weeks, and that is not the case. There's some people in this room that have been engaging with Truckee Fire for the better part of a year, discussing their project, getting local support, figuring out what it takes to develop a project, get contractors on site, hire a forester, right? And these people have been engaged. And if you feel overwhelmed at the end of this, don't give up. It's okay. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. I would just really recommend that you reach out to us and attend all of these workshops so you know exactly what it is that is required of you if you want to apply for this grant program. This is a very unique opportunity that does not exist in really any other place of the country where we have a local fire district granting large amounts of money to their local jurisdiction. And really the process is created thoughtfully to make it accessible, but it is a process that we have to go through. And we have to have controls and measures in place to make sure that we're using public funds appropriately. I will say that I've written a lot of grants in my professional career, and I think that this is really one of the easiest ones to apply to. If you go to apply for state or federal grants like I do, the requirements and the stuff and the expertise required is unreasonably high, expectations on the content. So we really try to create this program to be accessible to the community. Let's get right into it. I do apologize about the white slides. I did my best to try to make this an exciting PowerPoint, but it is going to be a lot of words. I'm not going to read the words all day, but it is here for your reference. This will be recorded, and you'll see at the bottom I have the page number to the procedural guide listed. So when we're talking about these things, if you have questions, you are required to read the procedural guides in their entirety. Okay, so the Community Wildfire Prevention Grant Program this year in 2024-2025, we have up to $500,000 available. This funding is only valid for projects and activities within the Truckee Fire Protection District. If you don't know where the Truckee Fire Protection District is, then reach out to us and we can let you know if you're within it or not. Generally spans from Highway 20 interchange to the Nevada state line, and incorporates portions of Nevada, Placer County, and the town of Truckee. You'll see here in underlined that projects that are shovel ready, have strong community support, and contain matching funds will receive priority in the process. And we'll talk about each of these. throughout this webinar series. Projects will be selected on a competitive basis, and successful solicitation or consecutive awards are not guaranteed. This can be a tough one, right? Because the actual process of developing the project and writing the grant is not a reimbursable expense. That is stuff that you do on your own time, and you're doing all this work without the guarantee that you're going to get money. I will say that Truckee Fire is very opportunistic with our funding opportunities. If we find that a community has come together, has supported a project, wants the project completed, and has done the necessary steps, you're setting yourself up for success down the road, whether or not you are awarded a grant. Again, I'll say this multiple times throughout the series here, but applications must be submitted in full compliance with all stated requirements in the procedural guide to be considered for funding. There are no exceptions here. You must read the grant guidelines carefully. Okay, project types that are eligible. We've got 4 buckets of project types. That includes forest fuel reduction and forest health and resiliency. We'll talk about those projects, but projects really must be at least 5 acres in size to be considered for funding. Multiple landowners can combine to create a project greater than 5 acres. And really, these projects are designed with community benefit in mind. Of course, Community Wildfire Preparedness is another project. We had a cool project come out of Kingvale, Plevada last year that included basically improved egress signing and street signing and house signing, because if you've been in Kingvale, there's not a whole lot of that going on. It's really hard for first responders to find where they're going. So we did fund a community wildfire preparedness project. And we also funded in this bucket last year a fire detection camera that will be put on top of Soda Springs Ski Resort. The last bucket is wildfire prevention education. And this includes projects that basically provide some type of educational opportunity to the community. We'll talk about each of these quickly. New this year, I'll highlight, is that you can apply for just technical assistance from a licensed registered professional forester. So these projects can just be technical assistance planning type projects. We would prefer them to be implementation based, but we understand that technical assistance from a licensed professional is hard to come by and expensive. And so we will fund that cost. Forest fuel reduction projects include vegetation clearance in critical locations, maintenance of fuel breaks, selective thinning, modification of vegetation adjacent to roads, basically all your typical forest fuel reduction projects. Forest health and resiliency gets more into potential reforestation, biomass utilization, prescribed fire. Also includes technical assistance from a licensed professional. Community wildfire preparedness. And these could be projects to improve the hardening of a structure in a fire-wise community, purchase and utilization of early fire detection and software, evacuation planning and route improvements. There are projects that we will consider to improve community compliance with defensible space laws. We'll talk about this further, but we will not consider projects that only fund private land defensible space on a single landowner's property within 100 feet of the house. The 100 feet of defensible space is the landowner's responsibility, but take, for example, in Tahoe Donner, where you have a lot of green space directly adjacent to homes impacting their defensible space, or Glenshire, we will consider projects from HOAs who are wanting to improve their green spaces to be better compliant with defensible space laws. Wildfire prevention education, again, development of public education and outreach programs. This is definitely a specialty. All these projects are subject to Truckee Fire approval. Ineligible projects include the purchase of capital equipment greater than $150,000 cumulative, and purchase of capital equipment without clearly demonstrating how it will be used. installation and creation, or we'll skip that one. That one's pretty technical, but individual or private landowners requesting a grant specifically for work within the defensible space zone on their own property is not eligible for funding. It is the landowner's responsibility to manage 100 feet from their structures. That is state law. Projects or activities utilizing Truckee Fire staff without prior approval are not eligible. These projects are really intended to be managed by the applicant or a professional third party, such as a registered professional forester. Also, we will not consider requests seeking funding for programs or services already provided by Truckee Fire. If you have questions about whether your project is eligible, I really recommend you reach out to me and discuss. Eligible applicants include local agencies and special districts, Native American tribes, nonprofit organizations, or HOAs with a 501c3 designation. Now, eligible applicants may include, under specific conditions, private, non-industrial landowners, other HOAs or POAs, mutual benefit corporations. We'll talk about the specific requirements for both of those next. Applicants could also be a privately held for-profit company only if 2-to-1 match can be provided. And by 2-to-1 match, I mean that if the project would cost $90,000, Truckee Fire will only bring $30,000 to the table, and the for-profit company has to bring $60,000 to complete the project. That's what we mean by 2-to-1 match. Okay, this is new this year. Specific requirements for private non-industrial landowners. This is really important if you're a private non-industrial landowner looking to apply for this program. We learned a lot of lessons the first 2 years of this program. One of them being is that I do not have the capacity to manage these projects or to permit these projects environmentally. I have a whole nother budget that I'm managing where I'm doing my own projects. Again, these projects are meant to be managed by the applicant or a professional third party. So if you're a private non-industrial landowner, in order to be eligible for this program, one, you can only apply for forest fuel reduction and forest health and resiliency projects. Those are the first two that we covered. You should consult with me, the forester, to discuss your project before submission. It's not a requirement. The one requirement at the bottom here is really important. Private landowners and mutual benefit corporations must demonstrate that they have retained a consulting registered professional forester prior to submitting your application. To prove this, you should have a letter from your selected registered professional forester stating their involvement in the project so that the review team can clearly understand how that individual is going to be involved and what they're going to do. Usually they're in charge of project management, environmental compliance, contractor oversight. They can help you with reporting. These people are professionals. This is what they do all the time. We have a list of consulting registered professional foresters on our website. There's plenty of them throughout the state that you could choose to work with. This is an important requirement, mostly to have some controls when using public funding. When we gift money to private landowners, we want to understand and make sure that they have the resources available to them to successfully implement the project. This program's not as easy as just gifting people $20,000, $30,000 to go do your own work in the woods, right? I'm sure none of us would be super happy if you heard that your Measure T tax dollars were being freely given out to every private landowner that applied, right? We have to have these measures in place. So this is an important one. You must have a registered professional forester consulting on your project, and they must provide a letter prior to submission. Okay, we'll get into some conditions and important points. Submission of the application is due on June 14th at 3 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. We will not accept an application a second late. Qualified projects and activities are limited to those activities that address the hazards and risk of wildfire threatened communities in our fire district and that focus on increasing the protection of people, structures, and communities. An important point, and we can talk about this more if you have questions about this, but any commercialization of your project, if you're going to make any revenue from selling the timber or selling the wood or selling the biomass or wood chips, you must have mechanisms to track that revenue and reinvest it back into the project. That could be as simple as having the contractor give you a discount on the cost per acre based on what they're going to make off of the material that they take from your property. Okay, we got a lot of conditions and important points. Please read this thoroughly on your own, but you must have the ability to plan, administer, and complete the grant project. People might ask, well, I don't have any experience managing a grant project or doing any of this type of work. That's fine. That's why we want you to hire a registered professional forester to help you through this process. For all projects, you are required to work with me to understand how you're going to achieve environmental compliance, and we'll talk about that more. Anytime we use public funding on private land, it triggers the California Environmental Quality Act. We live in the great state of California with all these amazing resources and values, and we are required to protect those. And again, no reimbursable work on the grant projects may commence until there's a fully executed agreement between Truckee Fire and the grantee, and you cannot recover the costs of writing the application. That is not reimbursable. Okay, we'll get into the application process here, and looks like I'm doing good on time. So again, we strongly recommend that you work with Truckee Fire for guidance in developing your project plans for your application. I mentioned earlier in the call, there's people here that have been working with us for the better part of a year as they have been putting their projects together, talking with their neighbors, trying to pull the details together, get the maps. This is a process, and this is a process we want to coach you through, and we want all landowners to be familiar with. Okay, first step with any project is requesting a project identification number from Truckee Fire. This is our internal tracking system. Okay, so you need to email grants@truckeefire.org with your name or your organization name, the name of the project, and the contact information for individuals submitting the proposal. That's step number one. Get yourself a project ID number. Okay, and then again, they're due June 14th. Okay, this is really the meat and potatoes of this process is the application package. Okay. We'll talk about the scope of work next week. We'll talk about letters of support and letters of commitment next week as well. We'll talk about project budget and project budget narratives on May 23rd. And then we'll talk about final submission, wrapping your application up on the last day, May 30th of our webinar series. Today, we'll talk about the grant application, and we'll talk about, the review process basically. But these are the attachments that must be attached if you're going to apply. A completed application package has all of these attachments listed on the templates provided by Truckee Fire. And if they're not following the format or following the description in the scope of, or in the procedural guide, it will be cause for rejection of a proposal if you're not following the rules for all of these attachments, which is why we're going to cover these in depth. Here's the grant application. This is just the first page. There's about 4 pages in the grant application. It's available online. It's available in a fillable PDF or a Word document. And we're going to talk about how we go about thinking about an application process. Okay, this is the document that you should probably spend the most time on, but it's not the first document that you're spending time on. right? We'll talk about, really the first part of any project is reaching out to Truckee Fire, discussing the project, understanding what steps need to be taken in order to move that project from conceptualized project to a packaged grant project. Okay, usually we ask people to start with community support. Reach out to your neighbors. Who's interested in having this work done? Are people willing to sign letters of commitment in your community to allow for this type of work to be done? Do you have good community support? That's really the first step. Then, if you're a private landowner, you really want to reach out to a registered professional forester and talk to that forester. You can talk to me as well. I am a registered professional forester. I can't act as your consulting forester for this project, though. You can reach out to me. I can give you ideas. I can give you basic scopes of work. I can come out and take a look at the area and give you an idea of what I think you should do and what your prescription should look like. And then you should turn around and you should talk to a forester. You should talk to some contractors, get an understanding of what this is actually going to cost. What's your budget going to look like, right? And then once you have kind of all these pieces figured out, then we kind of move to this application. Okay. You'll see in the scoring structure later on, this is worth 30 of 50 possible points. So this is really important to go through, and we'll go in more depth on the actual project application on May 30th. I just wanted to give you guys an overview right now. Limited responses to the space provided, needs to be concise. We're asking specific questions that are directly tied to the evaluation criteria. And that evaluation criteria is listed very clearly in the procedural guide. So each question that you're looking at in this application, you should probably go back to the evaluation criteria, understand how many points you could get for this certain question, and understand based off of our description what exactly we are looking for on how you should answer this question. So the review process is fairly simple. We convene a bunch of outside agency partners. We get about a group of 4 or 5 agency partners to come together. They all are not familiar with your project at all. So they can only grade, they can only consider stuff that is in the project application, the scope of work, right? If you're not representing something in the project, they're not going to know, right? And they're instructed to avoid any sort of bias, to only grade what's in the application. They're scored and reviewed independently by an application review committee, outside agency partners, and then they basically come and tell us what projects they think are the highest ranking, and we go off of that list when awarding. So let's talk about the points. Okay, so again, I just talked about how a lot of these points are tied to the prompts in the application. The first one, though, project background and scope of work. Oh, sorry about that. First one, project background and scope of work. This is actually a 2-page document, can be up to 3-page document that is your scope of work. All right, this is separate than the actual application. This is an attachment to your application. Okay, that's worth 10 points. And if you review the procedural guide, you'll see that the scope of work requires you to talk about the project background, provide a statement of need. Basically, we're asking for you to describe the scope of the project, the communities that will benefit from it. What are the goals of your project? What are your deliverables, specific deliverables, on the ground treatments? How many acres are you going to treat? Basically, how many dead trees are you going to remove? You also need to provide information on your environmental compliance strategy, which should be informed by your registered professional forester, and you'll have an implementation plan and a scheduled event. That's all in that first project background and scope of work bucket. That's all worth 10 points. Okay, collaboration, community engagement, and local support. Again, we're going to talk about that on May 13th in depth. But there is a specific prompt in the application asking you to talk about how you've done this. How have you collaborated? How have you engaged your community? What type of support have you gotten? We have in here worth 10 points, right? And in the procedural guide, page 15, you know, the project includes broad community engagement. So you want to describe how you did that. Local support is best demonstrated by the amount of match that will be provided. And we can talk about match. We'll talk about that in a later date, right? But you can demonstrate this support by matching contributions, letter of support from local agencies, letters of support from neighbors, right? That's worth a lot of that's worth a lot of points to us at Truckee Fire. We want to engage our community. We want to educate our community. We want buy-in on these projects. Project readiness is worth 5 points. Readiness is the ability to implement a project immediately once a grant is executed. A lot of people get confused on this. Shovel ready is a term we use when the environmental compliance is completed. So your California Environmental Quality Act document or your timber harvest plan exemption that your forester wrote is either ready to go or ready to be submitted. You can demonstrate readiness by talking about how you've engaged with the registered professional forester, what their timeline is for getting this permit submitted if it's not submitted already, right? What kind of contracts have you already set up for potential contractors that may work on this job? Have you gone out to bid? Have you gotten that cost figured out, right? These are all things that even though maybe you won't get the full 5 points because you don't have a CEQA document submitted ready to go now, you can still get points here by demonstrating your readiness and describing to Truckee Fire and the review committee what you've done to be ready to implement this project. We really do want projects that could be implemented in one field season, which is not always realistic, and we understand, but if landowners are really on top of it and they have a forester and that forester is ready to submit a document to get environmental compliance, we would consider that very ready. You would score some points here for sure, like 4 out of 5, especially if you had a contractor lined up with an agreement signed, whatever it may be, right? So just think about what you could do to demonstrate that you could implement this project right away. Don't say your project shovel ready if you haven't gotten those control measures set up, if you don't have a plan for environmental compliance, if you don't have a plan for which contractor you're going to use, right? If you haven't engaged your community or your neighbors, it's probably not a very shovel-ready project. Okay, landscape level context and project benefits. It's worth 5 points. Okay, we just completed the update Community Wildfire Protection Plan in Truckee. It is publicly available. The maps are online. It's interactive. It's there for you guys. The community is there for the community's resource. I will throw in the chat the link to the CWPP if you haven't been able to find it yet. But I would recommend as one of your first steps, get into the CWPP, go to the mitigation map, look at what the prioritized treatment map looks like, right? And start understanding what type of projects either are prioritized near you or have been completed near you in the last 5 to 10 years, right? This is where we start talking about landscape level context. Okay, it's like If you're designing a project that directly ties into a previously treated area and very intentionally is designed to increase the amount of area treated in that landscape, you're doing what we're wanting, right? You're providing that landscape level work, tying projects in, filling in the dots, basically. If you don't have that, if you don't have a recently completed project near you and you're looking at the CWPP map and there's a scroll, you can go look at completed and planned projects, and you can scroll back and you can look at the prioritized landscape. We prioritized a lot of our landscape. It's very likely that you're within a high priority consensus area. Okay, so if you're not tying your project in to an existing project, then you have another avenue here to talk about. Per the Truckee CWPP, this is a high priority project. It's located here. Even more points if you're thinking about how we're going to connect other treatments together. There's been a lot of big features pushed in over the last 5 years at Truckee Fire. We have basically treated 3/4 of Alder Hill, almost to the top. We treated a 1,000-acre fuel break from Glenshire to Brockway. We've done all these other little treatments around town that I think most people should be able to make the case that it's either one, building on an existing treatment and expanding the efficacy of that treatment, or two, it's within a high priority consensus area in the CWPP. CWPP is online on our website, publicly available, ready for you to plug in and play. If there's any questions, that's why we want you to reach out to me so that I can guide you through that process and show you where that information is and talk to you about how maybe your project is meeting some of these requirements that would get you more points. Okay, project benefits. You know, these are more aspirational, if you will. Like, what are the direct and indirect benefits that this project could provide? You know, a direct benefit could be protecting X amount of structures from high intensity wildfire, right? Another indirect benefit could be improving wildlife habitat, improving recreational values. You know, there's a whole gamut of project benefits that you could talk about, you know, that your project is providing directly and indirectly. There's a lot of information on Google on what those type of co-benefits and direct benefits may be. You know, reducing smoke impacts to elderly or just the sensitive people in our communities. You know, reducing wildfire impacts for both, you know, the trees and the structures, right? So there's all these benefits that we can think about that our projects could provide that we certainly want to try to list out as many as possible. Reasonable benefits. Okay, grantees, administrative capacity, and past forest management history. This is one that, you know, you might be an applicant and you may have no previous experience with anything like this, which is totally understandable. This is a specialized you know, little niche of a profession of grant writing and trying to bring money to a community, and not many people have that experience. But you all have had professional jobs that you have worked, which probably have some type of either accounting responsibility or management responsibility, contract administration responsibility. Really, you want to just try to list everything that you have done. If you're the applicant and you're going to be managing the project, what kind of qualifications do you have from your professional life that would make Truckee Fire comfortable granting you money? If you don't have any and you don't have it, that's honestly, this is reason number one why we want private landowners to hire a registered professional forester. Just because this is not something that people do every day, it can be overwhelming. It can feel like a lot, but to a forester, this is bread and butter. Okay, local regional plans and assessments compatibility. I'm going to go right back to the Truckee CWPP here. So we talked about trying to figure out, okay, landscape level context, what am I connecting some treatments? Am I creating greater benefit for the community by pushing this fuel break here? Um, there, the compatibility with the plans here, this 5 points really is compatibility with the Truckee CWPP. But there's also a suite of other plans out there that you could be consistent with. These plans aren't usually they're publicly available, but they're not necessarily public knowledge. Excuse me. This could include the CAL FIRE unit plan. This could include a Fire Safe Council action plan. This could include your FireWise risk assessment 3-year plan as well. Right? So there's a local hazard mitigation plan, there's a safety element plan. There's all these plans that are not necessarily that easy to find, but I will tell you the CWPP is really easy to find. We recommend everyone read it. And this is where you're kind of getting that 5 points by demonstrating that hey, my project is 80% within a prioritized landscape in the CWPP. Great. The last bit is the budget. The budget is not part of the actual application sheet. It's a separate spreadsheet available online. And the budget really needs to be clear, very reasonable. And then as part of your budget, as part of the spreadsheet, you'll also have a budget narrative that justifies the cost. Again, we'll talk about that in depth on May 23rd. So we designed this strategically to make sure that everyone was hopefully attending every webinar, because we really, again, we want our community to be trained on this process. If this feels overwhelming, that's totally fine. Like, let's work through a process together. Let's develop a committee internally, and let's work towards being able to submit a grant. I will say that this is not something that could always happen in a 2-week, 1-month period if you're just starting now. Okay, so those are the points. Very clear, very publicly facing on the procedural guide. Again, as you're looking at this stuff and you see, oh, that's worth 10 points, maybe I should spend a little bit more time on that. Okay, maybe I should go back to the procedural guide, look at what Truckee Fire is saying they want to see there, and make sure that I'm getting as many possible points. This is the game that we all play in grant writing world, okay? We have to have a fair and equal process. I write grants all the time, and I'm always trying to maximize the amount of points that I get. Okay, CEQA. CEQA is a fun one. This is not something that a landowner is going to be able to do themselves. This is why you need a professional forester, or if you're a nonprofit like the Land Trust, you already have a forester that does this for you, or Tahoe Donner, right? But if you're a private landowner, you are not going to be able to complete a CEQA document. It must be done by a resource professional. Certainly for our purposes, a registered professional forester. Okay, and Truckee Fire has to assume lead agency on these CEQA determinations. So if you get the grant, you have to submit proof of CEQA compliance to us within 6 months after execution of an agreement. If you don't meet that 6-month deadline, we could choose to pull the funding back from you and take it back and redistribute it somewhere else. We need CEQA compliance within 6 months. I'm not going to go in depth on what CEQA is and the various different ways that you can comply with CEQA. Just very blatantly state, very direct with all of you, that this is not something that the average landowner can complete themselves. This is also not something that Truckee Fire is willing to take on for a landowner. We tried that before, and it ended up taking way too much of my time away from my other projects. You cannot start any ground disturbing work without documented CEQA compliance. If you start work, if you get the grant and you start doing work and your contractor invoices you and we don't see CEQA compliance and we haven't approved that yet, we will not issue payment. We cannot legally issue payment. I'm happy as a forester to work with you directly on who I think is, a good group of foresters to reach out to, what I think is the best strategy to go about this, whether or not I think you should put the effort into this, or if it's something that Truckee Fire could take on because it's a project that we want to do. Okay. Please reach out. Please talk to me about CEQA. It's not something we expect any landowner to be an expert at. This is my whole world, and I'm not even an expert in CEQA. This is all I think about. Okay, post-award, what does this look like? If you get an award, if you submit an application and you get awarded a grant, awesome, right? This is a reimbursable grant program. Okay, so what that means is you as the grantee pay for the services, submit to us an invoice, we remit a reimbursement to you. We're happy to talk about other strategies if that's going to be a barrier for private landowners. I think we have some strategies that we can discuss internally about how to make that process work a little bit better if we don't have a bunch of cash flow to pay contractors. We can do advances. We can talk about paying your contractor directly. Most contractors are used to the typical 30 to 60 day wait period with these grants. So you submit an invoice to us, we reserve the right to have about 45 to 60 days to review that invoice before remitting payment. Contractors are usually pretty good with that. If they're not, we can talk about advances. We can talk about other ways to make this work. Don't let this be a barrier to applying for the grant. There's specific reporting requirements, which is again another reason why you want a professional forester so that they can help you with some of this stuff, right? Reporting may include project accomplishments. How many acres did you treat? How many acres did you say you were going to treat, and how many acres did you actually treat? We're talking about financial backup, all of the backup documentation from the contractor costs, your costs, all need to be tracked. We have internal accounting spreadsheets that we can share, and you can use some of these spreadsheets that we've developed for landowners to make this process really easy. You do not have to have a professional accounting software to make this work. This could be done with an Excel spreadsheet. We need treatment acres data that includes, shape files. Usually, if you don't have the ability to create shape files, your forester will. That includes, that's so we can track what's being completed, what you said you were going to do, and make sure that it's all tracking right and we're paying for the right work. Backup documentation is just, everything. We need everything. This is all auditable paper trail type stuff. If it's not auditable, it's not going to be acceptable. And then big thing here, big thing is pre and post treatment photos. It's an easy one to forget. All right, so we'll wrap this up. I've been speaking at you for about 45 minutes now. I'm sure you guys are overwhelmed. We're going to have 3 more of these. Again, you must read the procedural guide in its entirety. You must. And I don't put this here or say this to be facetious in any way, but this is just an honest, direct statement here. If this whole process really is your test. Okay. If you can't navigate the grant application process, then you're not going to be able to manage a grant and all the reporting requirements that go with it. If you're feeling overwhelmed, that's okay. I think we should consider reaching out to me if you're feeling overwhelmed. We can start a committee locally. Many groups have done this. There's a couple groups here today that have done this, basically gathered neighbors and delegated duties and are working towards submitting this application. Or again, it's a requirement, but you should just reach out to a forester and start working with a forester. This really is the process that we need landowners to start understanding. right? It's really easy just to identify a hazard and say that needs to be treated. And you're usually right, like that area does need to be treated, but there's all these other steps that we got to go through to make it a good competitive project. To end this, Truckee Fire will consider the wildfire hazards, risk to an area, the geographic balance of projects, and whether the project is complementary to other ongoing efforts when awarding grants. We do want to provide equity across the district. We understand that this will be very competitive, but we do want to balance where we're awarding these projects, and that is part of the review process. Next week topic is developing your scope of work and acquiring community support. I think this is going to be a really cool webinar. I'm going to pull some applications that we have awarded in the past, and we'll take a look at some of the scopes of work and what people have done in the past to be successful. And we'll talk about what it means to acquire community support, which is, all honesty, the hardest part of every project is getting everybody to buy in, give you the thumbs up, sign the letter of commitment. That usually takes the longest. This is the longest process of all the processes, is getting community support. So please join us next week. I think it'll be a good one. Here are resources for you all. This is available on the website. If you haven't been to www.truckeefire.org/grants, go there. All of the grantee resources are there, all the reading materials, the links to the website or the webinars, all that stuff, the schedule. Please reach out.